Right now. Okay, well, good evening, everyone. It's lovely to see so many folk here tonight. This is the fourth session in our UU Justice Ohio webinar series this spring called Building Beloved Community, and this is session 4, and it's focused on practical organizing skills and how we develop those skills in our congregations. So welcome to everybody. We're going to be doing some introductions in just a minute, but I'm Joan Van Biesler, and I am the Executive Director for UU Justice Ohio and live in Columbus. Gary, if you want to introduce yourself.
My name is Gary Davenport, and I am the Justice Ministry Coordinator for First UU Youngstown and a commissioned lay ministry candidate, which means I'm in a curriculum and a program with others like me that want to do deep and specific ministry to their congregation and region and throughout the state.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to, of course, a little advertising from our sponsor here. Just want you to realize that UU Justice Ohio has any number of different ways that you can be connected through our Facebook page, where we post a lot of articles, especially things that are coming up, really soon. We also have our website, UUJO.org, and we even have a Twitter account. I am learning to tweet. Not very well yet, but I am learning to tweet. And then I want to mention that upcoming very, very soon is that UUJO, as well as a number of other nonprofit organizations and social justice groups in Ohio and across the nation, are involved in the Poor People's Campaign. And there's going to be 40 days of action in Columbus between Mother's Day and the summer solstice this May and this June. And we're doing a lot of preparation work for that right now. And if you would like to be involved or know more about the Poor People's Campaign, which is working to counter the effects of systemic racism, poverty, the environmental degradation, and then militarization in our society. So if you'd like to join this campaign, this movement, see www.poorpeoplescampaign.org. That's a very simple website to remember. Or you can text MORAL to 90975. Or you can email me at UUJO, and I will tell you all about it, because our UUJO materials are trying to keep people up to date as much as we can. And then I also want to let you know that our next webinar is Saturday, April 21st. We have 2 this month. And that's going to be on a Saturday at 10 o'clock in the morning. And it's going to be Molly Toth, who is also from the UU Church of Youngstown. Bless your souls out there. And she is a professional advocacy coordinator for the YWCA. And she's going to be talking about grassroots lobbying, the very basics of what that word means and how we can do it. So Gary, I'll turn it over to you for our chalice lighting.
That burns deep in the soul. It is the flame of the human spirit touched into being by the mystery of life. It is the fire of reason, the fire of compassion, the fire of community, the fire of justice, the fire of faith. It is the fire of love burning deep in the human heart, the divine glow in every life.
Thank you. All right. Well, we're going to find out who we're talking to tonight. Just very briefly, I'm going to ask folk, and I'll ask you by name, to give us your full name, your congregation and city, because we like to know where we're all located here. And then in just one sentence, no Shakespearean sonnets, but as short as you can, what does the term justice ministry mean to you? You up for that? Okay. Can we start with you, Steve?
Hi, I'm Steve Fegge. I'm from the UU Church of the North Hills in Pittsburgh area. I'm also on the board of your Pennsylvania counterpart, UU Plan. Justice Ministry. Wow, you had to make me go first. Um, well, I mean, calling the members of your congregation to be their highest and best selves. You know, you know, it's often said that the church has two roles: to comfort the afflicted and to afflict the comfortable. And we are often very comfortable people, as you use, and we need to be, you know, prodded into doing what our consciences tell us we ought to be doing. And I think a justice ministry in our congregations, in part, is doing just that. So.
Great. Thank you. I figured you'd have something to start us out with. Can I call on you next, Deb? Is that possible? I'll unmute you.
Here, I unmuted me.
Okay.
I'm Deb Lemire with the UU Church of Akron, and I am co-chair of our Racial Justice Committee. Justice ministry, to me, I don't know. I do like, you know, what Steve had said about being uncomfortable. We're running into a lot of people that are not willing to be uncomfortable, that surprisingly thought they would be okay being uncomfortable. So I think justice ministry is really about being able to take people to that place compassionately, and to be able to bridge those gaps without it causing a giant rift.
Okay.
That's what I got.
Thank you, dear. Appreciate that. Nancy, can we have you introduce yourself next?
Good. Nancy King-Smith, and I'm with First Unitarian Church of Cleveland, but am currently in Portland, Oregon to take care of my grandsons who happen to be at swim lessons. So I have this little space of time in here that I'll participate today. Also working with, as chair of the Green Sanctuary Advisory Board for the UUA, and working hard on climate justice. Justice ministry, guess, means looking at all of our justice work through an intersectional lens of how they relate to each other. And right now, really paying attention to how we listen to the voices of those most impacted to do that ministry.
Excellent. Thank you. All right. Can we go to Karen next? I'll unmute you, Karen. There you go.
Also from First Unitarian in Cleveland. Hi, Nancy. I think it means, in a smaller sense, supporting those who are actively involved so that they can continue to be that. But most of all, if you're not actively involved in doing something to change the way things are, you've abdicated, I think, and you support just the opposite by your non-activity. And I know not everybody can be on the front lines, but it takes being out there to make change, to note that change is necessary. I'm beginning to mumble, so I'll stop.
Thank you. No, you're not mumbling, dear. Not a bit. Elizabeth, can we ask you? I'll unmute you. There you go.
I'm Elizabeth Perkins. I'm in Pittsburgh at the Unitarian Universalist Church of the North Hills with Steve. I'm also on the board of UU Plan, which is Pennsylvania's social advocacy network. And I'm also on the reproductive justice team of that group. So yeah, social justice ministry is what Karen just said, that your lack of action speaks pretty loudly, or your silence is sometimes polluting. And how to blend the spiritual with the social justice action is always a conundrum, because there's always people in the congregation who don't want to do that, and even ministers who don't want to do that. And that's a huge challenge.
Okay, thank you. Rick, can you tell us who you are? I can unmute you, Rick. There you go.
Okay, great. I'm Rick Kreitzer at the First UU Church in Columbus, Ohio. I'm a member of our Justice Action Ministry and coordinate the animal ministry, of which we're the only one in Ohio, sadly to say. I appreciated hearing, I believe, from Nancy, who has a environmental focus, because we don't have that. And I guess I'm saying that with our different principles, the seventh one about interconnected network of beings, that I wish we did a lot more stuff with environmental action and with support of other species. I think that justice ministry means identifying what our values are, and then, as others have implied and stated, to living them, acting on them, and trying to actualize them. Thank you. I'll stay here.
Thank you, Rick. And Anita, I've unmuted you.
Hi, I'm Anita Wessler, and I also belong to the First Unitarian Universalist Church in Youngstown, and I'm on the church board there and on Gary's committee for lay ministry. So I'm certainly interested in the topic, but I'm also interested in Gary, and I hope this will help me understand just what he's doing and how I can possibly be of help. And in terms of social justice, it's something that I am continuing to learn. I guess I take it to have a very broad meaning, and just how to help people connect from no matter what their political or spiritual beliefs are, to help them connect with each other in a compassionate way and make the world better. So
Great.
That is my interest.
Thank you. That's wonderful. And I'll share mine, and then I'll ask Gary to share his, because then we want launch into some material from Gary. I've always defined it to myself, kind of like the fortune cookie version of what justice ministry is, as a faith community grounded in deep spirituality, coming together to create beloved community. So that's mine. Gary, what do you think?
I think, for me, justice ministry is the opportunity to give everyone a chance that shows up to the church to figure out what they could be involved in. Because I've learned a couple things in the last couple of years. Everyone shows up for some kind of connection, and everyone that shows up thinks something of our principles. And if you think something of our principles, the world does not look like it should. And there's a place for you to do something to move it closer to what it is, what it should be, whether that's sitting and considering something you hadn't before, or just sitting next to somebody and offering a presence, or being out in the street or in a legislator's office lobbying. It could be any sort of action along those lines that's aligned with our principles is a just action.
Great.
So ministry is giving people chances to do those just actions together.
Thank you, Gary. That's great. And thank you all for sharing. I mean, there's no right or wrong answer to that, but it's interesting to see some of the convergence of our concerns. As we move into talking about, how do we gather some organizing skills for justice ministry, however we might define it. Here in UU Justice Ohio, we've started some experiments, some pilot program options, and Gary, I'm going to let you take it from here and talk a little bit about what's happening at UUJO and the pilot project coaching program and some basic concepts there, and then we'll move from there.
Okay. And Reverend Joan will fill in. This is a new process for us at UUYO. And I think that we may be one of the first couple of pilot programs in Ohio, but it is an opportunity to assess justice ministry and figure out what it could be doing that people don't think it is yet, and honoring what's been working and figuring out how to bring that along too. And so it is a team of people, and the team of people are the coaches from UUJO, and in UUYO's, First Church of Youngstown's case, there's Reverend Joan and Reverend Chris Long from West Shore UU. And the minister of the church, the congregation, has to be on board. So for us, that's Reverend Joseph Boyd. And there is a team of congregants that want to be involved in the process. And those folks were chosen based on their interest and experience and their willingness to show up and be more deeply involved. And then there's me, and I act as the liaison between the coaches and the congregants on a regular basis, and I help put things together like the meetings where we all sit together and figure out next steps and trainings. And so in my church, we picked the people on the team from the congregation. There are a couple that have been there for quite a while, and they offer a lot of experience in justice ministry. They've participated or run it themselves. There are a couple people that have been there for a couple minutes, and they're very active. And then there are a few people that are newer to the congregation or newer to deeper involvement in the congregation. And they all bring a different level of excitement and enthusiasm, or experienced ways of engaging without overdoing it. And they all know when it's time to pop in and out, and they all know when it's time to speak up, because they were picked because they were the right folks. They had some sort of passion and they wanted to do something extra with it. Anyways, those are the people. I think that basic outline of people would be the same at any church, although there might be different coaches. I don't think Reverend Chris's role wouldn't be a coach at his own church. I don't think. He would probably be the liaison between the UUJO team and the congregational team. Mm-hmm. So it would, you would mix and match, but the minister of the congregation is important to have on board, and it's important to have a team of folks at the church that are, even if they have to be a little transient, like at my church, and they're going to be able to pop in and out, knowing that they can pop in and out and still be part of the team, doesn't mean you have to show up to every single meeting. But that's the basic model for what you would look at when you put a team together. Okay. And yeah, you want to say anything, Reverend Joan?
Well, I was going to say, getting to some of the roots of why we're starting this program is because we found that congregations do struggle around their justice ministry. They do struggle when things are too scattered and diffuse, and there's no focused energy. And, there may be individuals who are able to do one thing over here or one project over here, but this is not as effective as it could be. And we want to be more effective. We want to be able to make these changes that we want to see happen. And so we know that when we bring our forces together, when we have a focus, when we have a concept of group mission, then we're able to bring the entire congregation together and focus them on a particular justice project or justice ministry area. And when that happens, we have seen absolutely remarkable results happen. And we'll actually be later in this series, we'll be talking with Akron congregation, for example, that have been able to channel their congregation into a focused justice ministry that is accomplishing wonderful things. And other congregations, like my old home church out in Denver, Colorado, they would do a different focus every year or sometimes every 2 years. And were known then for being incredibly effective because the whole church was involved in this process. So it's a way of focusing that congregational energy for justice, bringing the whole congregation in, and helping the lead team, the leaders in the congregation, develop the skills they need, the practical skills they need for doing that kind of justice, focused justice ministry. So all of these were the needs that we were trying to put together as we developed this, and keeping it close to the congregation, which is why the coaching structure and liaison structure that Gary was talking about. So that's what we're trying to do. Okay. Anything else, Gary?
I wanted to point out that it was the cross-section of people on the congregational team was important to me because there were people that found this as a way to get involved. So it's a little interesting. This is justice work. This is not lobbying, and this is not being at a march or a protest, and this isn't even a letter writing campaign of itself. But thinking about your justice work is justice work. You're thinking about how to be more effective in the world, and you're also thinking about how to develop leadership in the congregation. Those are really important because you can run and go and do events. You can do events that other people plan. You can do events that the church puts together and plans. But if it's not happening within a plan, you're losing some ability to give people opportunities in your congregation, and you're losing your ability to be more effective in your work out in the wider world. So thinking about justice work is justice work. And that's what Ready for Justice is a deep look at what's been going on, what should be going on, and who it's giving opportunities to. And we have 4 people on my team that are, they're not new to the congregation, but they're newer to deeper involvement. 2 of them are youth. They just graduated coming of age. And I thanked them last Sunday, and just it was wonderful to see that they thought that their involvement had paid off already.
That's great. Shall we outline some of the basics of the program and how skills are developed and how the assessment is done, and then we'll look at other aspects. And Gary will tell a little bit more about the story of what's happening with the congregation now. I want to tell you this is a work in progress pilot project at UU Youngstown, and a pilot project just starting now at Southwest in North Royalton, Ohio. And the first part of putting this kind of project into action is to pick the team. And Gary was talking about that, people with a broad vision. Youth are even involved. Some older folk are involved. I mean, it was a wide range of people that were picked for the team, and they all have that broad and holistic view of the congregation and its strengths and its growing edges. And this team is now engaged in a process of assessment of the congregation. They're asking, what's worked in the past? What's maybe not worked so much? So they're identifying growing edges. They're identifying the local opportunities they have for ministry, to serve and to act. And they're looking at what blocks them from being a more effective congregation. So they're doing that with the small groups in the congregation itself. And Gary's team folk are leading those. Then there's some discernment work that needs to be done, where the team gathers input to help articulate the congregation's sense of its aspirational values. How does it want to make a difference? Where does this fit into the congregation's mission? That's really important, because if it doesn't fit in the congregation's overall mission, it's not going to go anywhere. What's our spiritual foundation for this? The stage usually involves focus group work again and key leader interviews as they discern, what is that mission, that sense of mission there. And then the team is going to look at networking and resources. What do they have internally as resources and externally resources? How do they network with other UU churches or non-UU local community organizations? Because we can't do this alone. It takes a village to be effective in justice ministry now. And you got to build your village connections. Who do we partner with? What resources do we have? Where's our spirit for collaboration? And then they're going to get into the practical skills, leadership training, recruiting core leaders who will help with this whole project as it's implemented. Because this is just the planning team. But some of these Ready for Justice team folk might decide to be on the actual justice ministry team as it developed. And they can get basic skills in planning, volunteer recruitment, organizing, advertising, getting word out, media, how to articulate their values in public spaces, and develop those spiritual practices that sustain them in the work. And these are things that the region offers, that sometimes they're offered locally, these skills building, and UUJO is going to be offering a series of different skills for leaders in congregations, especially around articulating values in public spaces that will enable folk to do their lobbying a bit more effectively, or stand up in front of, the cameras at a media event and say why they're really there. And then how you recruit volunteers and thank volunteers and include them in the larger planning. That's going to be part of it. And then the team and the core leaders are going to look at action steps. How do they get all the stuff? Now that they know what they need, now that they know what they've already got on hand, how are they going to get more resources that they need? What are their short and mid-range goals? What training do they need to offer? Do they need to find? What's the budget resources for this? Because if you're doing a congregation-wide event, if you're doing a congregation-wide justice ministry, you need to know what kind of budget resources are going to be available to you. They're going to draw up some short-term action plans and then talk to the congregation. Let the congregation know what they have found in terms of assessment and discernment and people that are willing to be leaders, and then talk to the congregation about, they've already found out what its sense of mission is, but get congregational feedback on those goals and those action steps so that the congregation is involved in building this justice ministry together. They're going to be building it together. The team will be finding out some of the detail material, but then they bring it back to the congregation to work. And then, of course, there's the organizing. Core leaders will get, maybe this is going to be, some different teams. We don't know yet. It depends on what their focus is going to be. But the leaders will be gathering those resources, setting their dates, establishing the partnerships, inviting the volunteers, setting their timelines. And volunteers might even be from outside the congregation, which is a great form of outreach that we need to follow as well. And then, of course, comes implementation. So after the discernment and assessment and the training and planning and knowing where you want to go, then you set out on the road and you do it. So that's actually the process, in a nutshell. Now, it's going to be tweaked for every congregation because not every congregation will need every step. Some congregations already have such a strong mission statement and focus already that it's simply a matter of translating it into the justice ministry work. Others, it's kind of fuzzy and they're not quite there yet. So the steps will depend on the congregation. And this might take anywhere from 6 to 12 months. 6 months if some of the steps are not needed, 12 months depending on, how much information and needs to be gotten from the congregation and then articulated. And we have various other resources that they'll be using, like demographic resources that really show what your community needs and wants, and what your community has already, and what the general demographic layout of your area is. And you determine what your community, how you define your community. And then so far we have 3 coaches, Samuel Prince in Oberlin, Reverend Chris Long in Cleveland, and myself, but we'll be developing more. So that's the outline. Any questions that that I might answer, I will unmute folk and then see if there's any questions. Or you can unmute yourself and ask a question. Okay, and we'll have other time for discussion at the end as well. Gary, how about UUJO's story?
So I did want to make a quick comment before we get into UUIO's story. It sounds like a lot. There's a lot to do, but it happens organically. If you give a group of people that are excited about the work, the framework, they find ways to make it happen. And at UUIO, we had people that showed up because they wanted to be involved, and this was all shared with them in an evening. And the first thing that they said to me after I said, well, why don't we start to set up these discussions about the 4 initial questions, they said, we need another training. We need to do this thing again where we are pretending to run one of these. And that was the conclusion that they came to. And another congregation might not come to that conclusion and say, well, we need to do these as quickly as possible. We had a lot of folks, about half of the folks have done facilitation and the other half have not. They just said, we need to see it again. We need to be able to get up and pretend to run a section of it or something. So it's very organic. And if you're with other people because you want to be with other people and you share values and you think the work is important, they'll be honest and they'll tell you what they need. So my role was to organize the team at the congregation, which took about a little less than a month overall from the time it was clear how many and whom. And we had our first meeting in late January. And at that meeting, what we just heard was rolled out to us. And the training about training, so the train the trainers happened, how to run these discussion sessions. And it was a really comfortable meeting to me. I was excited because this was a pilot and I'm on the UUJO board, and these folks all showed up and extra people showed up, the parents of some of the people, and they said that, well, we just thought this sounded interesting too, so we came along. Like, you know what you're signing up for, right? Just listen to what happens and tell me afterwards what you think. And they caught me in church Sunday after service, and they said, so when are we doing the next step? What is the next thing? They just climbed right in because they knew they wanted to be there after they heard what was happening. They were excited by a way to be more involved in the congregation. So we had a meeting. We had a follow-up meeting where we did a shorter version of just another discussion session. And we used it to actually run a discussion session, and we brought other people from the congregation in. And we also told them a little bit about the program. So we weren't just asking them the questions, we were telling them why we were doing this overall. And they might become future members of the team, or they might be able to jump in at a certain point when other people have to jump out for a while. So after we did the initial training with the UUJO coaches, and we did a follow-up training about how to run the discussion sessions, we hosted 6 discussion sessions. And they were done. We took opportunities where people already got together. So there were Wednesday night midweek ministries that we took advantage of. And there were after Sunday, Justice Action Ministry planning meetings that we took advantage of. So people expected to come to a justice planning meeting, and they're not really picky about what happens at the meeting. They know it's going to be about justice work in the church, and that's what we did. We had this discussion about those 4 key questions, and we were able to do the coming of age group, and I reached out to the coming of age leader, and I said, what do you think about offering this to the coming of age youth? And I checked in with her next week, and she said they'll all be there. It's not optional. And we were very pleased with that. And they all showed up, and they participated in a special youth session that I was not allowed to participate in because the youth decided that if I was present, they wouldn't get honest answers out of the folks that were just like a year, 2, 3 younger than them. The 2 leaders on my team that are formerly youth, they just graduated from coming of age last year. And they made that decision on the fly. We went over how to run a meeting again. They role played for a half hour with me. And then they said, yeah, you should probably get out of here. And then they texted me halfway through and they said, you know, the part you were going to come in and you were going to do the wrap up for us, we can handle that too. Just come after we're done. Meet us in 15 minutes. So there was like a huge opportunity for them. They just, it was really cool. I wish I could show you the picture. I don't have their permission to plaster their picture all over the internet in a recorded webinar, but boy, were they happy that they had done it, and the youth gave them honest answers, and it was something I couldn't have gotten myself. So this is why the team has to be diverse in different ways. In the very least, they have to be different people from the coach or from the congregational liaison. So that's where we are now. So what we did each time was we had a discussion session with butcher paper or a whiteboard, and at the end of the session, we took pictures of the answers. And these were not clean, they were not legible, and there were scribbles and wipeouts and people putting stuff in there after the fact, because the discussions were organic and some of them went different places. But at the end, we documented the answers that folks gave us to the 4 basic questions and anything else that they said too. And so we have, you know, a couple dozen pictures of these whiteboards of butcher paper with these answers, and we have typed them up. And starting next week, we have what's called a table of justice. And it's a little facetious, but it's where all the justice ministry folks can talk to one another and talk to other people in the congregation interested in the work. And we have a couple booklets printed out, and people can look through them and see the actual answers. We actually documented what people in our congregation said and recorded it to share with everybody, that they're going to go and they're going to look and they're going to see, well, that's my answer. And so validation, right? Like, they did actually listen to the session that I was in, but then they're going to see that other people said the same things. And so what I've experienced in looking at the answers is for each question, there are about 5 different points that kept coming up over and over again. And those are going to be particular to my congregation, but I think that the fact that you see the same answers over and over again are going to be everywhere. It's just going to differ for what your congregation is into at the moment and where your justice ministry may be. So this brings us up to Sunday. And Sunday was a report out, and it has to be done, in my opinion, and Reverend Joan may have an opinion of this too. It has to be done during worship, because the work that we're doing is sacred work. We think that our principles reflect a world that doesn't exist and really should. And they are so sacred that we come together to worship around them, whether we are Christian or atheist or Jewish or any of the other theologies that we carry with us into the UU congregations we're a part of. So you have to do it during worship. It's sacred time, and you're reporting out on something that people took part in for maybe because they were interested, or maybe because they really feel that this is deeply sacred work to them. You have to honor that the work was important. So that's what we did. I had a homily, and it lasted for 6 or 7 minutes. And I talked about specific things that we learned and specific things that we got involved in, and why we're doing the work to assess the congregation's justice ministry. And then Reverend Joseph did a more general one, and it addressed an issue connected with all of that about whether we're enough or not. And so folks were able to hear something detailed about the work. I was able to thank the individuals. And like I said earlier, like, some of them got a really big kick. Some of the folks newer to deeper involvement got a real kick out of just having their name mentioned. And they weren't just being mentioned, they were being pointed out as people you can grab if you have questions too. So they were being put to work. But it was a wonderful opportunity, and that leads us up to this moment, where at some point in the next couple of weeks, Reverend Chris, Reverend Joan, and I are going to have a discussion about the next thing to do with the team as far as discernment. So we're going to look over these 4 question areas and all the answers that we saw. And I'm probably going to talk about some of the leadership and the things that they've said, and about how they want to be involved over time, and figure out what the next training session at UUYO with our UUJO coaches looks like. Mm-hmm. That's where I am at the moment, Reverend Joan.
That's great. And those of you who are on phone can't see the slide with the 4 questions in it that they were using for this assessment. And the questions that they were using for the assessment is, what two things have been going well in your congregation's justice ministry, or what two things have been inspirational? Is that right, Gary? Yeah.
Yep.
Yep. And then where would you like to go with justice ministry if you were doing it differently or could change things in the congregation? And then what gets in the way of where you'd like to go and what stops you? And then finally, who should we be talking to? What are our resources and our partners? This is gathering some information, not only assessing the past and the current justice ministry programs, but setting the groundwork for that discernment and that networking and finding resources in the next two steps. So that's what they were doing with those 4 questions, is laying a whole lot of groundwork with these congregational small group discussions.
And we had about 6 of those.
You had about 6 of them.
6 of them, and then some conversations on the side too.
Mm-hmm. Any questions about that? We kind of mixed the process and the actual questions themselves there. So let me ask you a question. Let's see how you respond to this, okay? If you were in a small group, about 8 people, and you were asked the question, what 2 things have really been going well in your congregation's justice ministry? What's been inspirational? How would you respond?
This is Deb.
Yep.
And I would say the 2 biggest things that go well in our justice ministry would be our work with our immigration workers partners. And for many years, we have a very strong foundation working in our communities with immigrants and English-speaking classes, and helping them in their process of becoming citizens and whatever other things that happen. And we have that as very solid in our congregation. Mm-hmm. And then the other thing that I think is going well, but it's still in baby stages, is the working to address our white supremacy issues, and which everybody is, it is a big focus now, and what that struggle is. And there's a lot of willingness to do it as long as they can remain comfortable. So, which kind of defeats the purpose. But that's a normal reaction, so that's where that's why I say baby steps, because we don't have 100% buy-in. And it's like, a lot of people will be like, yeah, this is great. It's terrible things that are happening, blah, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. Oh, you want me to do that? So it's like, yeah. So that we're in that place, which is, probably a place everybody gets stuck in. So I think it's working well. At least is the motivation of wanting to do it. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But we haven't gotten to the all-in thing yet, but we're working on that. Okay. So those are the 2 things.
Well, that's great. How would somebody else answer that?
Hi, this is Eleanor Helper from Oberlin UU Fellowship. I have been not as active in social justice as I was formerly because of health problems. From my point of view, the 2 things that are going well are we have a cause of the month, and the whole collection plate goes to that cause, which is many of them are local agencies that are selected by the congregation at the annual meeting. Another thing is that in a way it's kind of a failure, but in a way it's going well, is the whole town, or at least the religious community, is involved in family promise, housing families and single mothers for a week. And we were a host family, a host church for a couple of years. We found that with our small size, we have now about 70 members, that we could not maintain the number of volunteers that is necessary So we have become a supporting church in which we help supply food and volunteers.
Okay.
We have a small group that is looking at white supremacy. Unfortunately, I'm not a member of that group for personal reasons, but I understand it's going well. So that's
Great.
2.5 things.
Thank you. Thank you. Let's get somebody else. What 2 things in your congregations? We're not going to go through all 4 questions. We'll do the first 2, I think. But somebody else. What's going well that you'd want to lift up?
Well, Karen, I was hoping you'd jump in. But maybe we can do this jointly or disagree or agree.
Okay.
You know, we have some good programs that are going that are related to justice. One is an after-school program for middle school students. Another is our work with Greater Cleveland congregations, which includes working with a school. And those are going well, have moderate involvement from the whole congregation. We also are in a time of transition and are so trying to do some new things, including dealing with white supremacy, and have an anti-racism task force that's kind of looking at that, and a whole effort that is a growth through service that isn't terribly clear at this point how it's relating to justice ministries. So I think that's kind of what I would point to at this point. There are some other, the environmental group is continuing to do some things, particularly around gardens and recycling, but there just isn't total congregation involvement. Our interim minister is helping change that, and we're beginning to get a little more engaged with immigration issues and some other things.
Okay.
Karen, do you want to add to that?
Thank you for rescuing me. I would agree with what you've said, Nancy, but I think you've indicated it's a very modest involvement. Historically, we've not been terribly involved, and there's a lot going on with our new interim, so we're not there yet. There's one other small piece that most people don't even know about. There are 4 of us who are beginning to create an outreach to the Euclid Police Department, which is one of our suburbs, where there have been some tragic events. And we are working with 2 attorneys in Cincinnati who are UUs to try to learn more about what's going on out there. What are their practices? What is their selection process, their training, their evaluation? But we are in a very, very early stage of that. And it's just the 4 of us that are involved. So I hope we can come to some better understanding locally of what happens in our communities when use of force is way beyond the pale, and to work constructively with them, not as an enemy, but all of us wanting safe communities, respect and dignity and fairness. So we'll see how that works out, but I think it's an important step.
Okay, that's great. Does anybody else want to answer that question, or shall I have Gary ask the next question? Let's go to the next question, Gary. Let's see how people might respond to that one.
So, where would you be if you were doing things differently? or could change up how they have been done. So in our congregation, we thought about what had been working, and we thought about where we wanted to be content-wise or like issue-wise, what issues we wanted to engage. We also thought about how we'd like to do it differently too. So maybe there's not just one justice ministry, and we don't think of them as subcommittees. We think of them as teams. Maybe we'd like to be doing more with addiction ministry, and it's been nascent for 2 years, and it's time to push the button. Those are the kind of answers that we heard. It's about where would you be and how could you be doing things differently. Does that make sense to everybody? Does anybody have something that jumps out at them? Not all at once.
That's a hard one.
This is a reflective question, and we didn't get answers right away. We gave people during our sessions the ability to sit and write for 2 minutes and then sit and talk with one other person for 5 minutes before we all reported out as a group. So there was a lot of reflective time and shared reflection in this answer. So not expected to be polished by any means with what you're thinking.
I'll take a crack at it. It's Karen.
Okay, and then Elizabeth after that.
I think that for us, having a clear sense of our mission and ministry, I think in the earlier session, you spoke about needing to understand why you must exist, not why do you, but what is your essential core that requires the existence of our church. And that's something I think we need to deal with. The second one would be to be able to listen carefully to each other, to be honest in our thoughts, and to be able to be vulnerable and still be listened to and respected, so that we're talking about important issues, not glossing over with trivialities, but really digging in. I think those are two things that would be important for us to work on.
I saw Elizabeth hand up.
Sure. I'm not sure if this is the point at which we get specific, but our congregation has said, yes, we want to work on a certain issue. And in our case, it's gerrymandering. But then you go to, how do you, it seems like the congregation is happy for the team to do the work, and they come out, they don't want too much, I don't know, but I don't think they want too much influence. Services are supposed to be spiritual. I'm not sure because I'm still new at this church. And then at coffee hour, it's so hectic. There's so much socializing going on, and we have our table, and come over to the table, but they're busy. So those are nitty gritty things I'm wondering.
Mm-hmm. Did the congregation as a whole vote on a focus?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
If I could jump in, yeah, I'm from the same congregation. We're in an interim period as well, and our interim instituted what he calls the Gardner model, and in this case, it means he did a series of surveys where everybody ranked their preferences, in ranked preferences, and we did statistical analyses of all of these to see what social justice issue rose to the top. And in Pennsylvania, gerrymandering is a big issue right now. Our church is located directly to the south of the obstructionist chair of the committee that's holding up the anti-gerrymandering bills. So we're kind of at ground zero for that. So it's kind of a hot button issue for our congregation. It was a natural issue for the congregation to take. Well, I mean, I think in general we do a good job at process, but not so good a job at spiritual grounding. Even what Gary was talking of, the kind of work he's been doing to try to give a spiritual grounding to the the social justice work of his church. I'm not sure we're really doing a good job of doing, and maybe that's a member of our Sunday services team who develops our Sunday services reached out to Liz and I about trying to incorporate social justice more into the day-to-day ministry of the church, and that's something we need to look into. And it's something I personally feel woefully ill-equipped and woefully untrained in how to do that. And so yeah, how do we inspire? Yes, I mean, it's exactly what Liz says. I mean, our church says they want to do social justice, but they really want other people to do social justice for them. And how do we inspire the congregation and make them feel that we have a mission statement. We have a mission statement that dedicates us to do social justice work. Mm-hmm. But how do we move from that to real inspiration and giving it that grounding that's going to move people into action?
Yeah, that's all that discernment work that comes in there, and getting the congregation's commitment as part of that. Gary, how are you guys? You talked a little bit about the inspiration, the spiritual grounding that you're setting. Is there anything else you'd like to add on that?
Every time I get a chance, I remember to put in that this is sacred work. We don't show up to do this work because we're volunteers at a community nonprofit. Church is different.
Right.
We care about one another, and where else are you going to get check-in? At our meetings, I used to be a paid community organizer, and I was expected to produce and report. And so we would curtail, I would try to push along the discussion and try to get to the point and this and that. And, that worked most of the time. And sometimes people didn't listen to me and they talked as much as they wanted. Church is the place where you're supposed to be together because you want to be together. So the social justice meetings tend to be various kinds of meetings, planning meetings, and these discussions. There's space for people. And there's constant reminders that we don't show up and do this difficult work that we're scared to do sometimes. We don't show up and do work that makes us uncomfortable, right? We're not talking about marching. We're talking about showing up to a video that talks about white supremacy and not having actually talked about the topic a whole lot. That's scary for white people. It's scary for non-white people to see what the reaction is. And having white people struggle with that, there's repercussions and ripples throughout the congregation and the world, right? We think about those things and how we affect one another. It is very sacred work. So I just always try to put in try not to do anything without a chalice lighting and a chalice extinguishing or some sort of opening words or closing words. You make the space sacred, whether you literally light a candle or you ask people to do it in their minds.
Yeah.
And if we don't have anything else, we have somebody that will stand there when somebody else reads the chalice lighting, and they'll hold their hand in a chalice and they'll put their finger in the middle and pretend it's a flame. Like, we've opened sacred space. It's silly, but it makes people laugh and they want to be together.
Yeah.
So I just try to underline that all the time. I come from a tradition, a paid organizing position, where there was no room for any of this. And I used to be so confused by the religious folks that showed up to our trainings. Why are they here? They're not desperately in the situation where they need to change the policies. And I always missed, and this is when I was a nascent UU too, I always missed, they thought that this was sacred work. They showed up to be with other people.
Yeah.
What a great example. So it's always been there. And if that means that you don't get everything done at the meeting that you think you should be getting done, I would go so far as to say maybe you should be thinking about what you're actually trying to do at the meeting.
And when we get to the discernment stage, which is the next one that UU Youngstown will be approaching, that is where we talk about the theological grounding and the spiritual grounding in a major way. Discernment is a fancy word for the spirituality of all of this, why it's a faith community doing this work and not just another nonprofit. So that's why the discernment phase is in there, is to help people see this as a ministry and a spiritual expression of their faith. Okay. But you can see, you do these are 4 assessment questions. These are 4 grounding questions. And anything else, Gary, that comes from, your experience of working with these assessment questions in your small groups?
Well, so in September, was it September that I did this webinar? And I think, Karen, you were on the call. And the number of other people on the call, and I just realized that a lot of what we were talking about was congregational organization and congregational practice. And what I was talking about was how to do one-to-ones, and it was all these skills-based things. So the reason that I wanted to focus on Ready for Justice during this call, which was ostensibly the same call as we did in September, the content's different. It's because an assessment takes into account the rough edges and the growing edges and the weird patterns that each congregation has and where they may or may not be where they want to be. So that was something that I have learned through this process. I can't just go and parrot things that I used to do as a paid community organizer for a progressive community group. I have to take into account the fact that we're working on congregations. Congregations are kind of like big families with growing edges and rough edges and pained edges that need to be accounted for. And that has been shown in the discussions that we've seen at my congregation too. That's just been underlined for me. So I think it's an important point to make. We found patterns in the answers to these questions. None of them were all that surprising to me. And I think that there's a lot of learning that can be done by looking at them together in the near future.
And I think too that you touched on it, Gary. That's why we use the term justice ministry as opposed to social justice.
Mm-hmm.
Because it is a ministry and not just a nonprofit social justice group.
Big difference.
Big difference. Big difference. So let's move on. It's already 8 o'clock. Questions, guys? Or comments?
This is Deb. I have a question.
Sure.
So for a congregation to go through this process, how does that seed get planted? It seems to me that it would have to be something that the board and the minister were actively wanting to see happen, because it seems like you have to involve, worship and all those things get coordinated and work through a calendar and all of that. So how does that happen? How do you how does a congregation find out more other than me just going and saying, hey, I listened to this webinar, but get more
First step.
Yeah, I can say that, but they're like, Deb, you're always coming and saying you've listened to some webinar. I'm like, yeah, I know. But so how does it happen on a bigger scale? I guess how does the larger group of UU churches and in our area start to go, hey, this is happening and this is working and this is, how does that happen?
Well, Gary, can you say how the decision was made in your congregation to get part of this? This is a pilot project.
Mm-hmm.
And actually it was kind of farmed out to a couple of congregations that we knew would be friendly already. But how did that decision get made in Youngstown?
Well, and so for a little more background for everybody on the call that might not be familiar, I am on the UUJO board. I'm the Justice Ministry Coordinator at my church. So I saw Ready for Justice coming together as a function of UUJO's programming this year. And being the Justice Ministry Coordinator at my church, I've been keenly aware that we've had a pattern of a project taking off out of an existing social justice ministry group and becoming a thing on its own and leaving the group non-existent outside of the life of this new project. And I think that we always need space to evaluate a social justice ministry should be in part a service to the church to have space to do social justice discernment over time. I thought, well, what better way to do discernment than being pilot? it dovetails with all the work that I'm supposed to be doing for my congregation, for the UUJO board, and for my commissioned lay ministry candidacy. So it was an easy thing for me to think about and want to do. But as far as, so that's how it came together for me. But as far as back at the congregation, I engaged the minister and I said, I think this tool will be useful because we've had discussions about how we'd like to have a sustainable, ongoing, and reflective social justice ministry at the church. And really bolster what we've been doing and could be doing in the future. And Reverend Joseph is a really supportive minister, and he just said, you know what, sounds great. What do you need me to do? Show up, and there's no promises. If we go to this first meeting with the UUJO coaches and decide that this sounds weird, then we'll say so. He said, I'll show up. And just like everybody else, it was an evaluation because everybody's free to leave at any point. But that was where we went. I went to the minister and he said, yes, I'd support this. And I went back to the UUJO board members that were to become our coaches. And they said, you got to get a team. And then I went and organized the team by asking people face to face. And it was really funny because most of the time they said yes halfway through my question. And it was, I didn't have to think that hard about it.
We had some board support too.
At UUIO, yeah. The board has generally been supportive. I don't know. Is there something specific you wanted me to mention there? Because I just think the board's generally been supportive at my church.
We've also taken this to Southwest recently in North Royalton. And there I had a meeting with the minister. And then we met with a couple of the board leaders. And from there, we then did a meeting just last week of the small team that the minister put together. Just like Gary put together a team in Youngstown, the minister at Southwest put together a team. It's kind of a smaller church. And we met with them and went through the program and did the teaching of how to do the small group assessment work to begin with. And so they're now organizing their small group assessment. But it had minister, board leadership, and then social justice. They have a social justice team. They're going to call it a justice ministry, by the way, from now on. So that's where we started. Now, Deb,
I was just going to say a follow on that. So once this pilot is done, is that then there going to be some way for other congregations to take a look at how it worked and what the results were and how they can get into it? Is that?
Yep.
Okay, cool.
Yep, because there may be sections of this that we change entirely.
Sure.
The discernment with its focus on theology and spirituality and mission is one that we're developing and may be unique to each congregation. That's kind of what I'm working with right now as a possibility. And then we're keeping notes on everything. Mm-hmm. And our liaisons in the congregations will be giving us feedback. And the coaches, of course, are keeping notes. So we're doing this as a qualitative experiment.
Okay.
A qualitative experiment. But the big thing is to get the key leaders on board and that small team of folk that are going to carry this through is absolutely key. And Deb, I think I should note in your congregation in Akron that doing a basic assessment of justice ministry is something that we started there about 10 years ago, maybe 8 years ago.
Okay.
When the minister first came, when Tim Temerson first came, we came and we started doing basic assessments of ministry. And that's where a lot of these questions and things came from. And I know that doing an assessment of your justice ministry way back then set a lot of people onto a different path in terms of the congregation's work. And we didn't even have the other stuff to back it up yet.
Okay, cool.
So you guys may have already done a lot of the assessment, maybe not.
They may have, and I'm not in that loop because I wouldn't have been part of that at that time. So,
but now like I said, certain elements of this will be right for some congregations and certain elements would not have to be done.
Right.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Thanks.
Other questions? Steve, I'm going to ask you, put you on the spot with UPlan. I know that other social action network groups in the UU system and all, not too many of them are involved with their congregations. Does UUPlan do work or coaching with congregations?
We haven't. We just had our a board retreat this past weekend, and we were trying to think of ways to become more engaged with the congregations. We have a liaison system, of volunteers in each congregation that are supposed to represent UUPlan in the congregation. I don't think that system really is functioning very well. That most of the congregations aren't very aware of or engaged in the work that UUPlan is doing. We have a series of justice team calls, 7 issue areas, and they advocate for various bills. I mean, I find I'm personally on the anti-mass incarceration call, and I find that to be very useful networking to find out what people are doing across the state, because we have a lot of people who are very active with a number of different organizations, and that is useful and does enhance my work with organizations here locally that I'm personally engaged in. But that's not necessarily engaging my congregation or a broader range of UUs and getting engaged in that issue.
Right.
I frankly haven't had too much success in doing that. So, I mean, we were thinking of having regional coordinators or regional organizers under the executive director, perhaps one for Western Pennsylvania, one for Eastern PA, that would probably do something of the same role that you're thinking. Now the UUJO team you're talking about is what, three ministers that are going into the congregations. Another thing, we don't really have an awful lot of ministerial buy-in. I mean, we have, there are not a lot of ministers that are engaged at all. I mean, aside from Joan Sabatino, our president, and the minister at Germantown in Philadelphia, perhaps the minister at Mainline. We generally do not have a lot of ministerial engagement, so we don't have that to draw on. That's one issue that we want to address. We want to find ways of getting more ministers engaged, both ministers and RE directors engaged in our work. We have no youth ministry. We have no outreach to youth right now, which is another thing that we desperately want to get more engaged in. Our thinking is that if you have someone, some kind of relationship manager, basically, to go into these congregations and to learn the lie of the land, to understand how their justice ministry works now, and build relationships with them, and both ways, to listen to them, to help listen to what they think, how they think we will be relevant to what they're doing, and then also represent the work that we're doing now, and trying to engage with them on that basis.
Okay.
So.
No, that's good to know. I just was wondering, because a lot of this is coming from my 10 years as a congregational life consultant, and the belief that in a congregational system like ours, that the strength of our larger justice ministry is going to be based on the strength of justice ministry in our congregations. So I realized that when I came on board with UU Justice Ohio, that UU Justice Ohio could not do its work well if the congregations were not strong in justice ministry. And that's what started this thinking with the board. And we've been wonderful conversation partners. Just to let you know. All righty. Little sideline there on some philosophy here. Any other comments or questions? Shall we close if there's no final comments or suggestions or questions from folk?
Sure.
Okay, great. Gary?
This is Daring Vision by Maureen Kaloran. We extinguish this chalice flame, daring to carry forward the vision of this free faith, that freedom, reason, and justice will one day prevail in this nation and across the earth. May it be so.
Thank you.
Let it be.
And thank you all for being with us tonight and hearing about this, and look for more information in the future, especially as we carry forward the pilot programs. And by the way, Chris Long, Minister, and I are going to be presenting the state of the pilot programs at General Assembly this year. So we'll have some more information for how Youngstown is proceeding and how Southwest is proceeding, and be able to report on it there. All righty.
No
All right.
pressure.
Thank you.
Thank